Hi there and welcome back to another video. This is Gina from McGuire. So today I am sharing with you some new ideas for using background stamps. Now background stamps are great for creating fun ink technique backgrounds and such, but you can also use them for one layer pieces. Now I didn't keep most of my cards one layer, but you definitely could with these simple techniques. I combine different background stamps and use only parts of the background stamp to get new looks. And you can definitely do this with whatever background stamps you may have. So let's start with this example here. I'm using a 6x6 piece of white cardstock, but you can use any size that you want. I wanted it to be a little bit bigger than my card so I could save the scraps for another one. I'm drawing pencil lines right down the center in both directions, so at the 3-inch mark. It doesn't matter how dark you draw these because this is actually the back of our stamped piece of paper. I'm using the new Gina K diagonal stripe stamp. This is one of those background stamps that can be used with any style of card, and I use it several times in this video. So I'm going to lay this stamp down with the rubber side up so I can just press my paper on it to stamp. I'm only stamping the corner of the stamp. I'm using Applemint Ink. And I'll take my piece of cardstock here and I'll lay it down so that the pencil lines line up with the edge of the stamp. Once I have that lined up, I can press down to transfer the ink onto my cardstock. And there you can see I have the corner of my panel stamped. So I find that when I have a background stamp like this, I like to have it laying down on my table and lay the paper onto it so I can make sure I press it down evenly. Again, I'm using the pencil lines to line up with the corner of the stamp. I'll press that down firmly. I like to press all around and make sure I really transfer that ink. And there we have another corner done. So I'm hiding my pencil lines on the back of the cardstock, which is really handy because then I can use those pencil lines to line it up with the corner of the stamp. So I'm using 4 different ink colors here for the 4 different colors. And once I'm done, I have this really cool looking background. You can use any background stamp for this, but it's definitely most effective with this diagonal stripe. Okay, so now I'm using my Holtz Trimmer to trim this down to a note card size, and I can save those scraps for another card. So I assembled this into a card. I used the Memory Box Jotted Thanks die set, and I stacked several die cuts on top of each other for dimension. I also added Tonic Aqua Shimmer pen to the die cut so they have a little sparkle to them, and added a few stars too. The final note card size is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. I also stamped a coordinating envelope, and I wanted to show you how I did that, since I did a coordinating envelope like this for all of my cards in today's video. So before we go to the next example, I wanted to show you this. You can use background stamps to easily stamp on the flap of your envelope. Here I'm inking up part of my stamp. I have taken a piece of scrap paper and tucked it into the flap of my envelope. I'm going to lay the flap of the envelope down onto the inked stamp, press that around, and when we take this off, we'll have the matching stamp on the flap of the envelope only. This is one of the great ways to use background stamps on your matching envelope. On all of today's envelopes, I also use the Ink Blot Shop Envelope Mail Art Stamp Set. This is a really creative stamp set. So there's the basic frame at the top with the lines that you can write the address on. Then along the bottom of that frame, you can use any of these border stamps so that you can have a creative little area to write your recipient's address. So what I like to do is use this stamp set to stamp several envelopes at once, since I'm usually making lots of cards at once. So I use my stamping tool. This is a MISTI stamping tool, so I can stamp many of these. I'm positioning the top of the frame and the lines for writing the address into my MISTI, using my creative corner there to make sure I get it straight. I then put my envelope in there and stamp it with a coordinating ink, and there we have the Please Deliver To with the frame. Now I'm going to, over on the side of my MISTI, pick a different border each time to stamp on the envelope. This time I'm using the star. This way I can leave the label of the stamp in my MISTI for the other envelopes that I'm going to do, and then off to the side here, stamp whatever bottom border I want to. Okay, so here is another example. This time I thought I'd show you how you can do this corner stamping technique, but using a stamping tool. This is the Reverse Confetti Pattern Block Stamp Set. I really like this stamp set. I like the design of these two squares and that you can use it for simple card design. And the sentiments are sweet also. I'm going to use that floral square. It's not a full-size background stamp, but it'll work great. I'm also using the Ink Blot Shop Wild Hatch Herringbone stamp. I'll be using this for several examples today. The style seems to work with a variety of cards. This time I'm using a 4 by 5 1/4 piece of white cardstock, and I again drew pencil lines down the center in both directions. I'm using those lines to put the square stamp in one corner, and I'll go ahead and stamp that with a Gina K Passionate Pink ink. I then can just rotate my paper 180 degrees and stamp it again, and that will perfectly stamp both corners. Keep in mind you could do this technique just like I did before without a stamping tool, but if you want to stamp several at once, you can definitely do it this way. Once I have the first two corners, it's time to come in with my next background stamp, and I'm lining it up with the pencil lines. Notice this background stamp is hanging out of my MISTI. That's okay. I have my white paper lined up over to the right. I can ink up my stamp and stamp it in the corner, and it's okay that part of the background stamp is hanging out. So you can get creative with your MISTI stamping tool, and you can use it even if your paper or stamps are hanging out of your MISTI. Now keep in mind this is a clear background stamp, so you can keep that foam pad in your MISTI. You don't have to remove it. If you're using a rubber stamp, you need to remove the inside of your MISTI, and then you can stamp with it. Okay, so now I have my 4 corners stamped. I decided I wanted to add a bit of soft color, just a tone-on-tone color, to the 2 floral areas. You could use any coloring for this. I just used Copic markers because I could easily find a light color that matched the ink. So next time you stamp a background stamp with outline images, you can add a little tone-on-tone color for a bit of interest. It's a fun trick to use. Next, I'm adding a piece of white craft foam to the back of my stamped panel, and it's cut to be a little bit smaller than the panel itself. I'm going to use a heart die to die cut through both of these layers, and believe it or not, it will cut through both. The craft foam will kind of flatten when you run it through your die cut machine, but if you leave it for like 20 minutes or a half hour, the craft foam pops back up. So I'm taping the die in place, running it through my die cut machine. Any die cut machine should work for this. And then we have a window on the front of our card panel and dimension behind it. Okay, so then I have a yellow note card. I'm going to trace the heart onto it so I know where to die cut on the yellow. And I'm going to cut a window on the front of the yellow with the same heart die. And that little heart over there we can save for another card. I added a piece of white cardstock inside of my card so that it would show through that heart window. I stamped the sentiment "God is good" from this Jane's Doodle Bless Your Heart stamp set. This card is going to a friend who's had a lot of great accomplishments lately, so I thought it was perfect. I stamped that with black ink and then clear heat embossed it. So I added my stamped panel to the front, and it lines up perfectly with the heart window. You can see the dimension that we have because the craft foam piece between the stamped panel and the note card, and the sentiment that shows from the inside and the outside. So my first 2 examples show how to stamp just the corner of a background stamp to create your own patterns, and how you can do this with and without a stamping tool. Okay, next up I have a few examples showing how you can stamp part of a background stamp onto a card without using masking. I find that often when you mask an edge and then stamp a background stamp over it, you don't get a clean, crisp edge. This will solve that problem. First, I'm stamping this border image from that Ink Blot Shop envelope art stamp set that I showed you earlier. And I'm stamping that with Gina K Amalgam black ink so I can use Copic markers with it. Now here is where I'm going to do partial stamping of a background stamp. I'm drawing a light pencil line on the front of my card where I want the background to stop. I'm lining up a piece of tape with that pencil line. Then I will flip my panel over, and I'm using that tape as a guide to draw the pencil line on the back of my card. So that tape is just there to help me line up this line on the back. Okay, so now I can remove that tape. We can save it for another piece. But that pencil line on the back will help me know where to stamp my background stamp. This way I can ink up my stamp while it's laying on my table, lay the paper down onto it, lining up the pencil line with the edge of the inked stamp. Sorry, my head got in the way there. So the pencil line is lined up with the edge of the ink stamp. I can press this down firmly to make sure we transfer all the ink. And then when I remove this, I have a nice crisp edge to my stamping. I'm using a sentiment from the new Mama Elephant Creativity is Contagious stamp set. The sentiment that I'm using is crafty friends are my kind of friends. I love that large sentiment in the center. I plan to use that in the future. So I'm stamping this also with Amalgam ink. It gives a nice black crisp sentiment. And then I colored in those images with Copic markers, but you could use any coloring you want. I added it with a piece of craft foam to a white note card that's 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and I stamped a coordinating envelope using the Ink Blot Shop Envelope Art stamp set once again. So there you can see that nice crisp edge we have to our border stamping, since I stamped with the edge of the stamp instead of using masking. Okay, on my next example, I'm using 2 different background stamps to create a background, again using the edge of the stamp instead of masking. So here is the front of my note card. This is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch note card. I'm drawing pencil lines on where I want my sentiment to fit, so I could have an idea of where on the front I wanted my background stamps to end. I'm using a piece of purple tape here, any masking tape, whatever will work, lining it up with the pencil line, flipping my card over, and drawing a pencil line lined up with that on the back. So by doing that, I can transfer my pencil line to the back of my card so I can see it when I stamp. I've inked up part of my diagonal stripe stamp, and I'm lining it up with that pencil line on the back of my card. So I will put a piece of scrap paper over this so that I can easily press my hands around here and make sure I transfer the ink. And then when I remove it, I will have that stripe on the bottom of my card with a nice, clean, crisp edge. Okay, now for the top of the card, I'm lining up a piece of tape where I want the stamping to stop, flipping my card over, drawing a pencil line to line up with the edge of that tape, and then I can do the stamping again. So that tape is only serving a purpose of showing me where to put the pencil line on the back of my card. This time I'm using the Gina K Rose Lace stamp. This is such a beautiful stamp. Lining up the edge of my stamp with my pencil line, pressing that Hero Art soft pull ink down onto my paper. And then when I remove this, I again have another nice crisp edge. Next, I can erase all of my pencil lines and add my sentiment. I really like this Memory Box Folksy Script Hello die, but instead of adding a die cut, I wanted to use it as a stamp. So I die cut it from craft foam, putting some adhesive onto my acrylic block, and adding that craft foam die cut onto my block. I can then ink up my craft foam with whatever ink I want and stamp it on my card. Using craft foam is a great way to turn any die into a stamp. I then added some gems and also using some Tonic Aqua Shimmer pen to add shimmer to the word hello. So this was a 1-layer card, but I did add embellishments to it. I also added some Lucy's Cards flower sequins. I really like how they capture the light. And I stamped my coordinating envelope with the Rose Lace background stamp and the Ink Blot Shop Envelope Art stamp set. Okay, I have one more example using this technique of stamping with the edge of your background stamp. I'm going to skip through creating it because it's the exact same process, but I'll tell you what I did on it. On the bottom of the card, I black heat embossed the Gina K Diagonal Stripes background stamp. On the top of the card, I used the fun Pink and Main Sprinkles background stamp. This is a really fun background stamp that I think is great for any celebration card. And I inked it up with many colors of Gina K ink, so I got a rainbow look. I again used pencil lines and the trick that I just showed you to stamp the edge of the stamp along those diagonal lines, so I didn't need to use masking. I promise you that using the edge of the stamp gives much crisper results, whereas a masked edge sometimes doesn't. Now the sentiment is from this Hello Bluebird Cheery Greetings stamp set. I gold glitter heat embossed the word celebrate. Okay, so I have another example for you of just stamping the corners of your background stamp, but this time I'm going to do it a little bit differently. Starting with a 6x6 piece of white cardstock, and I'm drawing 2 pencil lines connecting the corners. This cardstock is bigger than I need, but I can trim it down and save the scraps for another card. Now this time I'm using the My Favorite Things Itsy Bitsy polka dot stamp, and I'm actually inking it up, and I'll pick up the stamp to stamp with it. I don't have an acrylic block, but there's no need. You can just pick it up and stamp it. And I'm lining up the corner of the stamp with the corner of my pencil lines that I drew. So it lines up very easily, and that way I stamp my pattern just into one triangle section of my background. So you can either use a stamping tool for your background stamps, or you can leave the background stamp laying on your desk and put the paper onto it, or you can pick up your background stamp and stamp with it. So I'm repeating this with 4 different colors, each time lining up my pencil lines with the corner edge of my stamp. Now you can see how this is so much faster than any kind of masking technique. So it definitely saves time and gives nice crisp edges. So I stamped the 4th section with an orange ink, and then I trimmed my panel down to fit on the front of a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch yellow note card. The sentiment is a combination of stamping and die cutting. The awesome is the Memory Box Jotted Awesome die set. It cuts the shadow and the word, and I stack several on top of each other for dimension. The Your and Birthday Girl are from that Hello Bluebird stamp set that I showed you earlier, and I just stamped that directly on the card. So this shows how you can do a diagonal pattern with corner background stamping, and even pick up your stamp to stamp with it if that's easier. Now here's another example I did with that same technique, but this time I used 2 different background stamps. The floral one is from Simon Says Stamp, and then I used the Itsy Bitsy polka dot stamp from My Favorite Things. Inside the heart window that I die cut is a sentiment from a Neat and Tangled stamp set. I really think this kind of card design is a great way to create a focal point for any sentiment that you've been wanting to use. Okay, so my last example steps things up a bit and actually incorporates some masking along with using just part of a background stamp. But I definitely think that this technique is worth that extra bit of time. This time I'm starting with a 5 1/2 by 5 1/2 inch piece of white cardstock. I'm drawing pencil marks 1 1/2 inches in from each corner, along each edge. So here I'm putting a 1 1/2 from this side, and then 1 1/2 from the other corner, and doing that on all edges on both sides of the card. Now this may seem a little silly right here, but this will make it very easy and allow me to do a fun like diamond shape in the center of my stamping. So again, on the other side, putting little tick marks at 1 1/2 inches in from both corners. Okay, so once I have that done, I'm going to connect my pencil lines. And I'll do this on both sides, and it'll help me with my stamping. Now, if you wanted to make a version of this that is a little easier to pull together, you could do just straight lines instead of diagonal lines. But I really like the look of having that diamond in the center of my card. So here we have the 4 lines drawn on the front of my panel. So now I'll flip it over and do the same thing on the other side. I'm connecting the tick marks to create those 4 diagonal lines. Now I did start with a 5 1/4 by 5 1/4 inch piece of cardstock. That's because I thought I was going to turn this into a square card that was 5 by 5, but I ended up trimming it down later. Okay, now it's time to do a bit of masking on this one. I'm using the Thermoweb purple tape, but you can use any masking tape. I like to use this because I can wipe the ink off of it and reuse it several times. So I'm masking off one of my corners, lining up that first piece of masking tape with the pencil line. And by the way, you can reuse these masking tape pieces many times. It's one of the things I like about it. Okay, next I'm going to take that ink blot shop background and put it into my MISTI with the stamp part facing up. So it's right in the corner of the MISTI with the stamp side facing up. I'm taking my white cardstock piece with the masking tape down, lining up this pencil line with the edge of my background stamp. So see how that's lined up with the edge of my background stamp. close the MISTI door on that tape. So the tape is holding the paper onto the door of the MISTI. This is backwards from normal, but it actually works great. Okay, so I'm inking this up with Gina K Sea Glass dye ink. Then I'll close the MISTI door onto the stamp. And again, that purple tape is not only masking off part of my background, it's also holding the paper to the door of the MISTI. This allows me to have my paper kind of hanging out of the MISTI and get good results. Okay, so once I'm done, I'll wipe the ink off of my tape and off of my stamp. I use a microfiber cloth for that, and it works great. I'll link to the ones that I use. I find that it's better than using a baby wipe sometimes because you don't end up with a wet stamp. So I remove the tape. I'm going to move the same piece of tape and line it up with a different pencil line, masking off the stamping that we just did. Okay, so let's line this up with the background stamp. So I'm taking the next corner that I want to stamp and lining that pencil line up with the top of my background stamp. Again, those pieces of tape that are sticking out the edge there are sticky, so when I close the door of my MISTI onto this, it'll transfer my paper onto the door. So I can ink up my stamp again with whatever color ink that I want. This time I'm using Jelly Bean Green, and I will stamp that onto the paper. So when I remove our masking tape, you can see how those two areas of the background stamp meet up nicely without overlapping. So in this case, I use masking to prevent overlapping, but I still use just the edge of the background stamp to make sure I get a nice crisp line. Okay, so again, I'm taking my background stamp, lining it up with the pencil line on the back of my cardstock, close the door on it, transfer the paper onto the door with the pieces of tape that are exposed, and again, I will stamp with another color of ink. So if you look closely at my final card, you'll see that anywhere I did masking with the background stamp, you don't get a crisp edge, but it works good enough. But those center lines of the stamping around that little diamond in the center of my stamp panel, those will be nice and crisp because I used the edge of the stamp instead of masking. So the last corner, we're going to mask off our last stamping. Put it into our MISTI again, lining up that pencil line with the top edge of our stamp. Close the MISTI door, transferring the tape onto the door, and stamp this up with our last color of ink. So there we have our completed background. I really like how these meet up nicely and you get a clean, finished look. Okay, now for the center, I'm using the Ink Blot Shop Margin Notes stamp set. I like the fun sentiments in this. It's great for Bible journaling, but you can also use it on cards. I decided to use the Draw Near to God stamp. I thought this would be a nice encouragement card for one of my crafty friends. I stamped it on my stamped panel and on a scrap piece of white cardstock. I colored in the pencil and cut it out from the scrap. And now I'm gluing it on to the card, lining it up nicely. That way I didn't have to mask the pencil, I could just glue it on top. I did trim my background down to fit on the front of a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch note card. And I also colored in the open letters on the card. To make the sentiment stand out, I added a bit of Tonic Crystal Glaze to the pencil and to the open letters, just so that it would have a little bit of shine. I like how this background technique results in an area in the center that's a nice focal point for any stamped or die cut sentiment. If you wanted to save time, you could just cut background stamped pieces and assemble them on the front of a card in this kind of pattern. But man, that one layer look that we get with this is really fun to use. So there you have a bunch of ideas for using your background stamps creatively, especially only using part of the background stamp so you can get a clean one layer result. If you're interested in the supplies, I always link them to a few sources in my YouTube description below. You can also go to my blog for more information. In the middle are a couple other background stamping videos that you might like. I appreciate you stopping by. I hope you have a great week and that you'll stop back soon.